so feel free to move it around. Great.
Hi everyone, we're going to get started. Hi everyone, my name is Pierce and I'm the director of the Transnational Literature Series here at Brookline Booksmith and your host for tonight's conversation. I want to open up this space by saying thank you for coming out tonight. The Booksmith has been around since 1961 and that's because of our wonderful community. Your support means we can keep having events like this, so thank you again. As you may know, tonight's event is part of our ongoing Transnational Literature Series, which focuses on stories of migration, the intersection of politics and literature, and works in translation. If you enjoyed tonight's event, please check out our full events lineup online at brooklinebooksmith.com so you don't miss some of the amazing authors we have coming up this fall, both virtually and in store. You can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram for updates. Toward the end of the event, we'll leave about 15 minutes or so for an audience Q&A followed by a signing. We have copies of Not Even the Dead available over at the register. We're also thrilled to be celebrating the 15th anniversary of Open Letter Books tonight, the publisher of this title and so many other favorites here at the store, so please feel free to stay after the event for a snack. I think that takes care of the business end of things. Now I'd love to tell you a little bit about our guests. Tonight I have the very great honor of introducing Juan Gómez Bárcena and Katie Whittemore to discuss and celebrate the release of Not Even the Dead, a hallucinatory journey from 1500s colonial Mexico to today's border wall, a story that transcends territories and centuries with echoes of Cormac McCarthy and Joseph Conrad. Juan Gómez Bárcena holds degrees in literary theory, comparative literature and history from the University of Madrid, and a degree in philosophy from Spain's National University of Distance Education. He's the author of numerous essays, short story, and poetry collections, for which he's received the Jose Hierro Prize for Poetry and Fiction, the International Crepe Prize for Stories, and the Ramon J. Sender Prize for Narrative, among others. He lives in Madrid. And Katie Whittemore's translations have appeared in 2 lines, the Arkansas International, the Common Online, the Brooklyn Rail, and In Translation. Her current projects include novels by Spanish authors Sarah Mesa and Javier Serena, among others. She lives in Valencia. We've hosted Katie many times virtually, so it feels extra special to have her here in person tonight. I'm so pleased to have them here together in conversation, and Juan and Katie.
Hello, everyone. Very many familiar faces. We're so happy to be here. Thank you. I am particularly delighted to be joined by Juan tonight because it's a real honor. He is truly, you are in the presence of one of Spain's leading novelists, especially of our generation. He's widely considered to be one of the best prose writers working in the country at this time. So it's very, very exciting. And I wanted to actually open our conversation with a quote from a really beautiful New York Times review that was published this summer on the occasion of the publication of the book by Randy Boyagoda in the New York Times. This latest work, Juan's latest work, Not Even the Dead, only adds to his standing thanks to a successful blend of ambitious literary dynamism with contemporary social and political commentary. The book is a confidently convoluted trans-historical chronicle told through the experiences of 2 men, Juan de Toñanes, a humdrum ex-conquistador keeping a tavern in Spanish-ruled 16th century Mexico, and Juan the Indian, a charismatic missionary taught indigenous man causing trouble for church and state alike. And I think that's where we can open our conversation, is thinking a little bit about the historical context and the seed of this book when we're beginning in 1950s Mexico, sorry, 1950s, the 1500s Mexico, not 1950s, several hundred years before that. And so we're beginning in the 1500s Mexico, and we do, as Pierce mentioned, end up on the US-Mexican border in the present day in what was then Trump's America. And so, Juan, I was hoping that you could read to us from the original Spanish text, the first couple of paragraphs, and we'll get a sense, and then I'll read as well, and we'll get a sense of sort of where we are historically and what the language is like at the beginning of the book when the plot kicks off.
Okay. Well,
Hi everyone, this is my favorite part because I can speak Spanish, so great. Well, let's go. Primero proponen al capitán Diego de Villegas, comprobada experiencia en circunstancias tan comprometidas, pero el capitán Villegas ha muerto. Alguien nombra a cierto Suárez, natural de Plasencia, a quien se le conocen más de 15 expediciones sin mácula, pero resulta que Suárez también ha muerto. Nadie menciona a Nicolás de Obregón, porque lo flecharon los salvajes purépechas, ni a Antonio de Oña, quien después de cometer crueldades sin cuento contra los indios paganos, se ha ordenado sacerdote para proteger a los indios paganos. Durante unos instantes se levanta un cierto entusiasmo en torno al nombre de Pedro Gómez de Carandía, pero alguien recuerda que Pedro finalmente recibió encomienda el año pasado y con ello envainó la espada y tomó el látigo. Pablo de Herrera está preso por orden del gobernador, a resultas de ciertos diezmos nunca cobrados o cobrados 2 veces, según las versiones. Luis Velasco se volvió loco soñando con el oro de las 7 ciudades. Domingo de Cóbrece se quedó sin indios que matar y tornó a su primer oficio, la crianza de cerdos. Alonso Bernardo de Quirós lo intentó todo para conseguir el favor del visorrey en los campos de batalla de la Nueva Galicia, la Gran Chichimeca y la Florida, y luego apareció colgado en su casa con una última carta al visorrey engarfiada en su mano derecha. De la habilidad y el empeño de Diego Ruilova nadie duda, pero tampoco de la tibieza de su fe, razón suficiente para apartarlo del mando de armas en esta sensible ocasión. Para llegar al nombre apropiado todavía tienen que descender muy abajo en la pila de pergaminos y transigir con muchas debilidades y flaquezas humanas. Pasar de los capitanes a los sargentos de caballería y de los sargentos de caballería a simples soldados de fortuna. Un camino pavimentado de hombres demasiado viejos, hombres retornados a Castilla, hombres mutilados, hombres alzados en rebeldía, hombres examinados por el santo oficio, hombres desfigurados por la sífilis, hombres muertos. Hasta que de pronto, tal vez para ahorrarse el esfuerzo de seguir desempolvando legajos y expedientes, uno de los escribanos se acuerda de sacar a relucir el nombre de cierto Juan de Toñanes, antiguo soldado de su majestad el rey, antiguo buscador de oro, antiguo casi todo, a quien no ha conocido personalmente, pero de quien se cuenta que burla la miseria persiguiendo indios fugados de las encomiendas de Puebla. Un hombre humilde y, si se quiere, indigno de la empresa que les ocupa, pero del que por otra parte se dice que es cumplidor y buen cristiano, con una habilidad casi milagrosa para retornar siempre con el indio que le indica, engrilletado y de una sola pieza. Y que me aspe, continúa el escribano, si ese trabajo no se parece como 2 gotas de agua a la empresa para la que sus excelencias buscan autor. Una misión que, salvando las evidentes distancias, consiste precisamente en dar con determinado indio y traerlo de vuelta. Lo mismo da si vivo o si muerto.
Thank you, Juan. Thank you. So, yes. The first name put forward is that of Captain Diego de Villegas, a man with proven experience in such nettlesome situations. But Capitan Villegas is dead. Somebody suggests a certain Suarez from Plasencia, known for more than 15 exemplary expeditions, but it turns out that Suarez is dead too. No one mentions Nicolás de Obregón, given that the Perpetua savages shot him through with arrows, nor Antonio de Oña, who committed innumerable atrocities against the pagan Indians, only to later be ordained as a priest in order to protect said pagans. A degree of enthusiasm momentarily surfaces around the name of Pedro Gómez de Carandía until someone recalls that Pedro had finally received his encomienda the previous year, sheathing his sword and taking up the whip. Pablo de Herrera is imprisoned by order of the governor, for the result of certain tithes never having been paid, or having been paid twice, depending on which version you believed. Luis Velasco went mad, dreaming of the gold in the 7 cities. With no Indians to kill, Domingo de Cobreces returned to his previous occupation as pig herd. Alonso Bernardo de Quirós did his best to obtain the viceroy's favor on the battlefields of New Galicia, La Gran Chichimeca, and La Florida, only to wind up hanged in his own home, clutching a letter addressed to the viceroy in his right hand. No one has any doubts about Diego Ruil's skill or determination, but neither do they doubt the tepidness of his faith, which is reason enough to discard him from the command of this sensitive situation. We're going to skip ahead to where we find Juan de Toñanes. To find the right name, they will have to dig down deep in the pile of scrolls, grapple with an abundance of human weakness and failure, move from captains to cavalry sergeants, and from cavalry sergeants to simple soldiers of fortune, a path paved with men who were too old or who have returned to Castilla, mutilated men, rebellious men, men tried by the holy office of the Inquisition, men disfigured by syphilis, dead men, until suddenly, and perhaps to save himself the trouble of dusting off more dockets and files, it occurs to a clerk to suggest the name of Juan de Toñanes, former soldier of His Majesty the King, former treasure hunter, former almost everything. The clerk has never met him personally, but Juan de Toñanes is said to have avoided poverty by pursuing those fugitive Indians who escaped from the encomiendas of Puebla, a humble man, unworthy, perhaps, of the enterprise at hand, but with a reputation as a competent person and a good Christian, endowed with an almost miraculous ability to invariably return with the Indian in question, shackled and in one piece. May God strike me down, the clerk continues, if his occupation isn't the self-same enterprise your excellencies require someone for, a mission that, accepting the obvious differences, consists of just that, of locating a specific Indian and bringing him back, dead or alive. So the novel, as we said, spans hundreds of years, and it begins sort of like with these elements of a traditional historical novel. There's a bit of an adventure story. We have a mission, a secret mission. We have these historical elements, and the language is especially, and it's unfortunate because in the original Spanish there are certain addresses and titles that are used, but really it has to do with how the verb is conjugated. So when they're talking to each other, they're using a form of address that is no longer used in contemporary Spanish, and that's lost in the English translation. That's one of the things that unfortunately we're not really able to do with English. So that was something that was kind of a challenge. But in the original Spanish, the tone is formal, it's elevated. When we're talking, you'll see with some of the selections that we'll read tonight, the change in language as the novel progresses in time. So Juan, can you tell us a little bit about how the first pages of the book sort of set the tone in terms of the style, but also kick off the plot? Where are we going with this ex-conquistador, this ex-soldier who's now in kind of a rundown tavern owner?
Well, my first idea with the book was playing with the genre, literary genres.
Yeah, genres, yeah.
I wanted to start the book with a very classical formulas, with this the adventure, the hero, the secret mission, because my idea was in the middle of the book, I was about to change completely the tone, the language, and the plot of the book. Mm-hmm. Because my idea was trying to show the readers that we are in a historical novel, maybe an adventure novel, Western maybe in some ways, but in the middle you are going to discover that it's a philosophical book, a fantastic book in many ways, because, well, there is a fantastic idea in the book, is that when Juan de Toñanes started his trip, he's living in the south of Mexico in 1545. He's going to north, and he's going to do a travel not only across space, he's going to do a travel across time. So he is going to reach Trump's wall in 2020, and the travel is 500 years, more or less 500 years. So for this reason, I tried to be very classical in the beginning, because I wanted to break the expectations of the reader, that they can't expect that what is going to happen. And with the language, it was quite funny for me. It's quite funny because I started with this very formal tone, with the 16th century language. Of course, not exactly how they write in the 16th century, because we couldn't understand that, or not very well. But during the book, this language is going to change, and you are going to see all the differences between the past and the present in the language. So it was really funny to work.
And that was one of the most enjoyable parts of translating the book. And it was a big challenge, but it was really fun. It was like a puzzle, you know, and to be able to work with the text and have the opportunity to play with language in that way, and to sort of try on these different voices was really cool. So it works so beautifully in the original, and I hope that everyone enjoys it in the translation as well, because it's one of the more, I think, unique aspects of the book. So early on, this is not a spoiler, early on we learn the nature of what Juan de Toñanes' quest is going to be. And he is going to be hot on the trail of a heretic. The mission, should he choose to accept it, is going to be to track down another Juan the Indian, who's an indigenous man who was educated by the Spanish missionaries, by the friars, and who was in many ways an exemplary convert, right? He was like the model noble savage that they were able to convert to Christianity, and he becomes himself like a sort of a religious zealot. And then he becomes a wanted man because of this heresy he commits, which is doing a translation of the Latinate Bible into Castilian Spanish, which of course is a language that he has been taught. So he is sort of appropriating the language of the conquerors to, in many ways, subvert and undermine what the religious project is, right, in the colony. And this artifact, this physical Bible, becomes known as the Padre's book, right, because Juan the Indian becomes known as the Padre, which means not only the father, but in Spanish, that's how they would refer to priests, right, so father, like we do in English. So the Bible this physical Bible becomes a very important part of the book. It travels with Juan through space and time. And I want to read a little section in a minute about the physical artifact, but biblical passages also are really important in the book. And they serve as sort of markers. I guess it's sort of like a framework in a way for understanding where Juan is in Mexican history at a certain time. And these passages in Juan the Indian's Bible help Juan the Conqueror, Juan the pursuer, sort of make sense, right, and understand what he's seeing around him in terms of the social and the political upheaval, right, that he's experiencing. So how did you come to use the Bible in that way? And my question was, are you a biblical scholar? Because how did you find like these perfect examples that fit so well from passages and quotes with the moments in the novel?
Well, I love history of religion, especially Christianism. I have read a lot about that, and I think the Bible. If you read the Bible not in a spiritual way, but in a historical way, you can learn a lot about Western world society, because Bible is everywhere actually. So Bible, I think that the meaning in the original language in Greek is books, plural. No? So in the Bible you have many books, many ideas. Sometimes the opposite idea. You have many traditions. You have, I think, 3 different languages. So you can find always you can find a quote that say what you want to say. So in history, everyone is always talking about the Bible. The Bible said that. So I thought that it could be a good option in order to show how change times, change society, but they use always the same reference.
Yeah.
So I read the Bible a second time, trying to gather the most interesting quotes and put in under a topic. For example, feminist quotes here, sexist quotes here, communist quotes here, capitalist quotes. So in each time I just went to the
Found
notebook.
it to
Okay, feminist. I'm going to use that.
Plug it in.
So it was really funny. Very slow work, actually.
Yeah.
Because I had to read the Bible, the complete Bible, especially the New, I don't know how to, the New Testament?
The New Testament.
Okay, the New Testament. And it was a really funny work, and actually I have learned a lot about my society,
Yes.
not only because of the book.
Yeah, wow, that's great. Yeah, it's so interesting because I love what you said about how they're able to, you're able to sort of point to the same text and make it fit, whatever you need in the moment. But this notion of ideology is so important. It's so central to the book, and it's one of the when I first read the text, which was when it came out in 2020, right during the beginning of the pandemic in March of 2020, and you sort of have this sense in the book that you're galloping along, like through. You really are moving northward. You're always moving north, and you're moving ahead in time. And you do feel like you're on this quest with him. And in terms of the ideology and what we see that's so fascinating is you see these the rise of these sort of messianic savior figures of all stripes, all kinds, are present in the book. And you sort of see the same process in history, the cyclical nature of history repeating itself, the rise of ideology and the failing of that ideology, and especially the failing in terms of the people that ideology purports to serve. And so there's always this promise of salvation, and the early salvation is going to be of a religious nature. Later, it's liberation, it's political. Further on, we have as you mentioned, capitalism, communism, and you're looking constantly at these dichotomies and on these sort of this interplay and this back and forth, this nature of history. And I'm curious about your most recent novel, which is called Lo demás es aire in Spanish, also has, and I didn't ask you this question in the email, sorry.
Don't worry.
Now we're just ad-libbing.
We are going to try.
But I'm so interested in this notion that you have of time and of history, and sort of how layers exist over each other. And I'm wondering if you could just talk a little bit about that, the nature of your own work and your own sort of literary project, and what history and time, and I guess ideology in some degree, has to do with how you work.
Well, I always write about time. I think it's the biggest topic in my books, and according to my point of view, the time is not progress as an arrow in one direction. It's like a circle. We are repeating and repeating a lot of times the same things.
Mm-hmm.
So on the other hand, I am interested in the similarities of the past and the present, because sometimes I think we used to think that many things change across the time, but I think most of the things are repeating and repeating, actually. And my idea is, if I can show the readers and show myself as well what is remaining across the time, we can know what mankind is.
Mm-hmm.
Because the things that never change, that's what humanity is. And I think it's the most important thing for me, trying to figure out who we are,
Mm-hmm.
and for this we need time.
Mm-hmm.
We need see us in time and see us not like in not across the time, but in a whole picture. If we can see all the times in the same picture, we can see very easily what is remaining, what is changing, and the echoes from the time. That's exactly the same idea. That's not exactly the same idea, but very close. And I think it's what I am trying to do here, and in the rest is there. I don't know the name in English.
Yes. Yeah. I wanted to ask about or talk a little bit about the echoes and the resonances in this book specifically, because you do that. You show that with language. There are certain passages, certain images that are repeated actually verbatim in different time periods and in different historical moments, and that it's a pretty sprawling book. And as we've said, you're beginning in southern Mexico and ending on the border 500 years later, and there are these through lines, these little threads that keep us connected. I'm thinking of like, you're following the thread out of the maze, and I think that happens through some of these like repetitious sections where we say, okay, we're here again in time, and that's really, really cool. I wanted to read a little section from also kind of early on in the book when we're introduced to that Bible, and because it sort of gives us an idea of what Juan is going to encounter. And this is where we go back to the idea of genre and of the playing with genre and different elements that you've used in this book, because there is sort of a speculative and fantastical element of this time travel that sort of happens in a really, really like nonchalant way. Like, Juan's in the desert. He's when the first time that he sort of skips ahead, and you don't really know what's happening. You don't know. He thinks he has the plague. He's getting really sick. He's very, very ill. And then when he wakes up, he's finding that it's actually, however many years in the future. And that happens at various points throughout the book. But a lot of what he ends up seeing, he has had a glimpse of before, and that in the Padre's book, in the Bible. Because the Padre has an apostle, Diego, who has made these strange drawings in the physical Bible. And I'm just going to read a little bit about it, because then you'll get a sense of what Juan is going to see on his journey. Diego says, how I have dreamt of finding scrolls, papers, anything. I even came to draw in, I'm ashamed to say it. I have gone so far as to fill the Padre's book with drawings. The Padre's book? He nods quickly, not looking at Juan, and without a glance, without a pause, he slips his free hand into his leather pouch and hands the book over. It is a black-covered volume, gray with mildew, edges bruised and abused like a too holy relic. It is, in fact, a Bible. It is the translation of the Bible by Juan the Indian, completed, and Juan weighs the book in his hand for some time, not daring to open it. He does, finally. The book from which Juan learned all he knows, all he believes. The book that woke the fury of the Inquisitor and the Viceroy. All that is left to do is open it, and open it he does. And inside he finds a Bible in Spanish, written in a fevered, furious hand, so enraged it seems to draw blood from the page. A Bible with some carelessly underlined passages, some pages with folded corners, and some pages ripped out. And among all that writing, not a single blank space. Among all those letters, he sees charcoal scribbles, bands of figures that pulse between paragraphs, between lines, between words. A torrent of shapes intertwined in interminable latticework. He sees, as if interpreting a religious tympanum, figures he recognizes and others which are a mystery. He sees Indians weaving baskets, and Indians harvesting gourds, and Indians kneeling in prayer. He sees the interior of a straw hut. He sees a naked woman bathing her naked child in a river. He sees turkeys and feather headdresses and flutes made of bone. In some cases, to round out a figure or create a shadow, the drawing makes use of a sinuous line of text, or even blots out a word, a smudge over the word mercy, over the word love. He sees children scampering amid laughter and shoves. He sees a man crying over another man's grave. He sees a ripened ear of corn that appears made out of teeth, and a set of human teeth constructed from kernels of corn, a smile, opened eyes, closed eyes, lips pursed to kiss or spit or blow out a flame. He sees the cycle of life, a woman who gives birth in Genesis amid unspeakable suffering, and a child who drags himself on the ground, who crawls, who stands to walk from Exodus on, who becomes a man page by page until he copulates piously in the Gospels, his phallus in the shape of a cross, his wife hollow like a sanctum or tabernacle. He sees that woman again, that same woman giving birth in Revelations amid unspeakable suffering, and he sees many other things he cannot manage to understand or explain. He sees the skeleton of a dead horse, bones worn smooth by sand. He sees a prison, or the idea of a prison, and 3 prisoners crushed together, languishing in hunger or pain or loathing. He sees a mule-drawn cart crossing through the thick of battle. He sees a wooden chapel, and then a stone cathedral, and lastly a cathedral made of iron, yet devoured by flames nonetheless. He sees a man on horseback, raising the plains and delivering hope and death. He sees a page stained completely black, as if in mourning for something or someone. He sees a cross formed from 2 arquebuses driven into the dirt and a black horse that waits. He sees an enormous snake slithering through the desert, and hundreds of men and women and even children hanging onto its scales as best they can. He sees a pyramid of dead women rising from the sludge of the earth to the sludge of the sky. He sees the desert and the black scar that runs through it. He sees a man shouting from the heights of a pulpit or stage, and below him he sees hundreds, perhaps thousands, of men bearing it on their backs, almost crushed under its weight. And he sees even more. He sees weapons from another time, campesinos, churches, gold coins, dawns breaking, warriors. He sees a drove of demonic gods, the dead idols of the Chichimeca, burning on an enormous pyre, a fire lit by the axe of the apostles, never to be extinguished through all that remains of the book, a fire that burns, that purifies some members of the tribe. Who knows whether all the members, men and women writhing amid the flames. And on the final pages, he also sees, as if born suddenly of a nightmare, armless men and legless men, and men with empty eye sockets, and men sliced open from stern to stem, and the enemy slinking among the bodies. He sees knives that travel from hand to flesh and from flesh to sheath, and he also sees beheadings and torture and deaths by arrow shot, men who drown in water and men who drown in flames, as if a Diego de Daga from other times had emerged from the past to torment the present. So it's a little intense. But I love that so much because it is this moment of really the future foretold, the next 500 years, and the things that he's going to see, the progress that's going to be made, and what the sort of like the heinous results of that progress will be, the violence that is birthed of what we consider progress. And so I'm curious if you wanted to talk, you've mentioned a little bit about the genre idea, and I'm wondering if you want to say anything else about this mixing of elements, and if you have a particular influence. Are there other writers that you've read or that you've seen do that you felt inspired by, or how did you read a lot of genre fiction? Like, how did you come to use these different elements and what's really a very sort of politically and philosophically grounded book? And I would just say, it seems to me that like a lot of there are moments that it is really intense, and we're talking about human history, so it's not pretty in almost all instances, if we're honest, right? But there are these moments where the tension breaks and there is some humor, and it seems to me that like some of the genre elements give us that break in the narrative tension, because there are funny things that do arise, like he's in a different time period and he sees that people are wearing wigs, or the first time he sees a mestizo person, right? He's only seen white Spaniards and indigenous people, and all of a sudden he sees that there are men walking around that are neither white nor indigenous, and it's this new race of people, and seeing it all with these sort of like this, the innocence of his gaze, I think allows a little break of that, some of that tension of the intensity of what we're reading about. Did you find that worked for you when you were writing?
Yeah, I think I use a lot of fantastic elements because, well, I love fantastic books in Latin American writers, especially Jorge Luis Borges, for example, Juan Rulfo, Julio Cortázar. And I think Latin America fantasy is influenced by the Crónicas de Indias. I don't know, Indian Chronic, what is the name in English?
Well, they are sort of the chronicles of the explorers and the conquerors, the Spanish conquerors in the Americas.
Yeah, and it's a very, very interesting literature that Spanish wrote in 16th and 17th century. And it's fantastic, it's fantasy in many ways because they are in a different continent with people that never heard about them, with different cultures, different language, and they see the world like it was I don't know, like it was fantasy.
It was magic. It was
yeah,
a magical
it was magic
realm.
because they don't understand anything. So they tried to express what this world was. And doing that, they made the first, the
fantasy fiction, right?
Yeah, it was fantasy fiction in many ways. So I tried to use fantasy in this book, not because I want to, because I wanted to show how a Spanish conqueror can see our world, our time. And from his eyes, everything is magic, everything is strange. And in this passage that you have read, I was very inspired by Aeneida. I don't know in English, La Aeneida, Virgilio.
Oh yeah, the Aeneid.
Aeneid, okay. Because in the Aeneid, there is a part that describes the shield of Aeneas, the hero. And in this shield, Aeneas didn't know that, but he has a lot of drawings. The Roman readers can recognize that these drawings are a prophecy about history of Rome. And that's an interesting idea, that you have the clue, the key to understand the future, but you can't understand anything. So I decided to put these drawings in this chapter, and each image of these drawings are a prophecy from chapters that you are going to read. So it's like. It was strange because I never write my books in order. I usually start in the page 100 or something like that, and then I return because the beginning is really hard to me. And it was really easy because I started more or less in the moment of the drawings. So I wrote the complete novel, and when I return it, I say, okay, what passages, what images I am going to put here. So I read my own book, and okay, this, it's okay. So it was funny actually.
So that's a good moment to sort of jump forward in the future, and I can read you just a tiny little fragment of the image of the train. So in the Bible, he was describing seeing like the great snake slithering through the desert, and we'll come to realize that this is a train that is called the Beast, the nickname the Beast, that winds its way through the north of Mexico to the U.S. border, carrying migrants and carrying mostly Central American migrants that are trying to make their way to the U.S. And so this passage, we have leapt forward in time, and what I would love people to do is to try to hear the difference in the language from what we read at the beginning. And you can see how different the register is and how things have really changed several hundred, a couple hundred pages in and several hundred years in the future. So now Juan he's like never seen a train before, and he gets on the train. The scales of the snake are, the human beings that are clinging to it, trying to make it to the United States. No one asks him where he's going. They are all headed for the same thing: the dollars, the gig, the grind, the good money. They're all going to the United States, which they sometimes call USA and other times America, or say to the gringos to the north, and sometimes they don't call it anything, they just point to the horizon. They speak of the border, of getting to the border, as if the border was a place, a destination in and of itself, not just a line that is crossed. There, on the other side, is where the money is, prosperity, the future, and all are heading to that future, on the roof of a boxcar that travels empty, on a train that doesn't stop. But the train must not be called a train. It doesn't take Juan long to learn this. Trains are the other ones, the ones people ride inside and not on top, people who buy a ticket and board at a specific time, when the whistle blows. This train is not a train, but the beast. They call it the beast, they explain, because of its inexhaustible voracity. A monster that feeds solely on Central American flesh. If you listen carefully to the beast, they tell him, if you pay attention to the squeals of iron, of hardware, underneath he'll be able to hear the moans of the men and women who lost their lives between its wheels. That's what can make you go deaf, not the thunder of the boxcars, not the whistle of the locomotive, not the hurricane of wind inside the tunnels, but that other hell that pulses below, those voices that continue to ask for help from those who can no longer give it. From his corner, Juan listens, Juan looks. He contemplates the beast for what it is, an enormous snake slithering through the mountains and the plain with its insatiable beast roar. That's what it looks like, yes, an insatiable beast, an enormous snake, and they are the scales, they are the rash, the tumors, the sores that the snake suffers, ugly like her, dirty like her, condemned to languish in the desert like her. So you can see that this is, oh, thanks, Jackie. Thank you. You can see, the power of that language and that rhythm, that sense of rhythm that Juan has in the writing, that you almost feel like you're on that train and you're clickety-clacking along the rails, and this sense of movement and of sort of propulsion, always north, always ahead. Juan, when we get to the border, there's another really interesting connection, I think, and resonances in this book, and many of you, I know some of you from book club have read Roberto Bolaño because I was there with you. And many of us would be familiar with Bolaño's work, and in particular, sort of his posthumous masterpiece, 2666, which takes as like a great source of material the femicides that have been occurring on the U.S.-Mexican border in Ciudad Juarez, and sort of the unsolved nature of many of these crimes, and the multi-layered, again, like social and political and economic reasons for why that's happening, and the sort of disposability of these women, many of which are factory workers or were factory workers, or they might be prostitutes or students, or it's cross sections of society have been affected by this really, really serious catastrophe of femicide in Juarez and the surrounding areas. So we end up there too. So this is another byproduct, right, of progress, is what it seems to me that the argument that's being made both in Bolaño's work and which resonates in this book as well. Do you want to talk a little bit about Juarez, and maybe if Bolaño wasn't, do you feel like you're dialoguing with Bolaño? I can't imagine that you weren't inspired in some way by that text with this section.
Of course. Well, I love Bolaño's work. I really love his books. And of course, 2666, it's one of my favorite books.
Me too.
I think I started to love Mexico because of Bolaño. Then I came to Mexico with a grant for writers, and I started to write about Mexico. But Bolaño was my key to Mexico. And yes, when I read 2666, I realized that feminicides of Ciudad Juarez had to be in my book because it's one of the phases of the progress of our time. We have the better things, we have the best technology, we have a lot of things, but we have the most horrible crimes but hidden in a place that never worried, never cared about the girls, never cared about the poor girls especially. So yeah, I wanted to write a chapter about this reality, and it's a way too that my character can figure out what is going on with the women across the novel, because at the beginning of the novel, well, he's a man from 16th century he's not thinking so much in women, but in the book he's started to be more and more interested in the
the reality of women.
Yeah, the
really.
reality of women. He's watching them in a different way, and in this part is when he discovered the most terrible things about the crimes against women. That's it. And so Bolaño, has a big influence to my work. Yes.
Yeah. That's great. Bolaño is one of my very, very favorite writers, so I think that's wonderful. I'm going to read you just one. This is actually not a lot of women speak in this novel, and I think that, as you mentioned, that's a function of the reflection of where we find ourselves in place and time, especially at the beginning. But here in Ciudad Juarez, we do have a really, really extensive monologue by a woman, La Guerrita. And I'm just going to read a little tiny piece of this, which is where she's a Central American migrant who's ended up on the Mexican border, working in a factory and trying to get enough money together to pay a human smuggler, a human trafficker, to get her across the border into the U.S. And she sort of is our eyes into the world of the femicides and the violence against women at this part of the novel. Okay. The woman that took her in, that she's living with, another factory worker, has disappeared, and she fears the worst. Okay, over the preceding weeks, she had read everything she could get her hands on about the wave of femicides in the papers or online, because her factory, in addition to paying for your funeral if God forbid you died, also had a kind of employee internet cafe where they could call their relatives or play solitaire or do whatever they liked. She knew as much as could be known about the subject, which wasn't a lot. She knew the guilty party was a serial killer who mimicked other serial killers, imitators in theory, but just as lethal in practice. She knew blame lay with the patriarchy. She knew blame lay with excess, an excess of women and an excess of desert. Blame lay with the gringos who crossed the border like they were going on safari, hunters ready to claim their female trophies. Blame lay with the Mexicans who no longer believed in the Virgin of Guadalupe with the intensity of yesteryear. Blame lay with the government, with the narcos, with the narco government. Blame lay with the women who walked alone. Blame lay with the women who walked in bad company. Blame lay with the women who were pretty. Blame lay with the shamanic rituals and black magic and the Santa Muerte and the Aztecs. Blame lay with living like this, partway between the city and the desert, between Mexico and the United States, between heaven and hell, on that irresolute land between something and nothing. Blame lay with values, with a lack of values. Blame lay with poverty. Blame lay with the desert. Ooh, I get the chills. Yeah. So I've chosen sort of specifically because I think it's really, really important to highlight sort of the serious nature of what Juan is tackling and what he wants to tackle in this book. And I think that it's particularly important that we're here talking about this in this Transnational Literature Series, because Pierce, who introduced us, really carefully curates these events, and there is a real eye toward sort of socially conscious, and there's a justice bent here, and Juan's novels lean towards that arc of justice as well. So what I've chosen to read is, it is heavy and it is intense, but there's hope in this book as well. And I wanted to ask you a little bit about that hope, and then we can end. I don't know how much time we have. We're doing okay. So I wanted to ask you about hope. And I wanted to ask you about hope and literature, and if literature, is it naive of us to think about literature's role in hope in the world in which we live and the world in which we will be living?
Well, maybe it's naive, but it's okay, because hope is being naive, and it's okay to be naive. We need hope in order to follow, in order to have dreams. If you are pessimistic, you can think, okay, in any time we have big dreams, these dreams are going to die, are going to broke, and it's true. But if you are optimistic, you can think that even in the worst times, didn't happen the worst things all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Happened Nazism, but Nazism was
Nazism,
Nazis,
Mm-hmm.
was destroyed. We didn't, never happened the atomic war, but always we were hearing that is where to happen an atomic war. So, well, we need hope. It's the things that we live for, I think. And I think it's related with literature, because hope is to follow a dream.
Mm-hmm.
Literature is a generator of dreams.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's quite related.
On that, I'm going to read a last section, and then we'll open it up to questions. Is that good on time for that? Okay, so Juan does make it across the border. And it's also not a spoiler to say that he does encounter the image of President Donald Trump on television, which is a shock all around to him. And once he's over on the US side of the border, we see him driving in the desert. He's with a mysterious character who remains quite mysterious all the way till the end. And this is a woman, so here we have a woman who sort of takes on the protagonist role of guide, right, and of oracle, really, in a sense. And she is describing they're driving through the desert where, and this is apropos of Oppenheimer, and I think this has been so much in the forefront of the culture right now as well with the success of that movie, and looking at, they're driving through the desert where the first atomic detonation took place. And sort of looking at that as, again, one of these critical inflection points in human history of, like, after this thing happens, nothing will ever be the same. Like, you can't put that back in any sort of box, right? And she says to Juan, "This is how the world ends," she says. "This is how the world ends," she repeats. "This is how the world ends. A future in which objects will reign. The books we write, the machines that gave us work or took it away, our satellites, our country homes, our toys, our schools. A future with a place for our works, but not for us. Maybe that's what we sought from the very beginning of the journey, a world without us, things without their names, names without their memory, no truth, no consequence. And that ultimate bomb, the daughter of all bombs, hasn't yet detonated. Or maybe she has," the woman admits after a silence filled with dust and asphalt. "Maybe she's already detonated in a way we didn't expect. Maybe she actually detonates every day, an explosion without flames or sound or hope. So often we have prayed two things. So often have we knelt before our machines, before our stuff, our screens. We have poured so much sweat and blood into them that now just one thing remains, to die in their name. The religion of capital outliving its faithful, highways outliving their travelers, borders outliving their immigrants. The future could look like that," the woman says, and her voice contains something of the many voices Juan has heard. A voice that unites known sufferings and sufferings yet to be known, but which still makes itself heard, still rises anyway, does not succumb to silence. This could be the future. This, she says, is the present. And it wouldn't take much to get there. We are, in fact, already so close. All we'd have to do is turn the wheel a little bit, barely a couple of inches, and the future that awaits us, she says, would be the desert. Or we could simply continue ahead, faster, always faster, and sooner or later, the desert would come again. Or we could stop at any point and refuse to advance, and then, of course, that's the desert too. All roads seem to lead to the desert. Maybe all roads are the desert. And yet, says the woman, yet, we are here. Somehow we continue the journey as if some hope remained. And who knows, she says, whether that hope isn't the journey itself. So that's all that I had prepared. Would anyone like to ask any questions? And if not, we can riff. Yes.
How much collaboration is there between you and the author as you're translating?
Well, it depends on the book. We didn't have much collaboration in this. I was able to sort of, when the translation was almost finished, I was able to ask Juan a few questions. But it depends on the book, Terry, and it definitely depends on the author. So in my experience, I've had really trusting, supportive, hands-off authors. That's not always the case with all translations or all translators. So I think this was a book that I had read and wanted to translate. So, and I've been really lucky because that's been the case with all my projects actually. But I think that when you come to the books the way that I've been able to come to them, the collaboration sort of already begins in that nascent stage of the very first reading, which is when I read the book, I love the book, I connect to the book, and I want to do it. I want to bring it into English. And so I feel like we were like already collaborating in spirit because as a reader, I'm in his world, which is really cool. So I was really lucky with that. And I don't know, have you had much collaboration with other, because Juan's works have been translated into at least 8 languages.
Mm-hmm. Well, it depends a lot. For example, from Greek, mm-hmm. I don't even know the name of my translator, never wrote to me, okay, the book is in my desk, that's all. In German, I have a lot of collaboration because my German translator had a grant in Madrid to work with me, so my Dutch translator sent me, 100 questions, and we work together.
It was like a co-translation into Dutch, yeah.
So there are a lot of options. I really like to collaborate. So if you translate
the next
one, we have to work more.
Okay, that sounds good. That sounds good. Yes?
Juan, did you try to read this after Katie was done with the novel?
I am going to do that, but I don't have the book yet. This is the first time that I can touch it. So yeah, I'm going to do that because, well, I am trying to learn English right now. So I thought that it could be a good exercise, read my own book.
Yes.
Because I don't have to look for a lot of words in dictionary, so I'm going to read it.
Okay, good. It will be like your English primer. Yeah. That makes me nervous. But
don't worry.
Don't read too closely. Oh, okay. I'm getting our publisher Chad Post, who's here in the audience as well, wants us to mention some really. He's right there. Hello. Just wants us to mention some really exciting news, which we just got today, and that is that Not Even the Dead is a finalist for a brand new inaugural translation award, which is called the Circador Prize, and it's a really, really cool prize because it is run by independent booksellers, which we love. Woo! So there are five independent booksellers on the prize committee, and there are no submissions. You can't like submit your book to be considered. Basically, they come together and they each nominate 2 books that they loved as indie booksellers, and that's the finalist list. So we just got the word today that this is nominated for the prize. It's a finalist, so we'll find out in a month, but it's very exciting. So. No, if there are no other questions, I think Pierce will have the closing remarks.
Hi. Is that on? Yeah. Thank you everyone so much. We're gonna do a signing now. You can line up over by where Katie is on that side. Please drink and enjoy. Lots of food. And thank you all for coming out tonight.
Thank you. The book is so beautiful. The original translation is just as the original. It's just
6 months, 1 month, if I can. Yeah, I really love it.